Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's complimentary webinar from ICMI, Achieving First Contact Resolution and Quantifying Its Top-Line Payoff, sponsored by SAP. Today, we will provide you with a new approach to first contact resolution that will both challenge conventional wisdom and provide you with new approaches for analyzing contact handling, allocating quality resources, and increasing the impact of your voice of the customer process. I'm Christina Hammerberg, Associate Editor and Community Manager for ICMI, and I will be your host today. Before we begin, let's do some housekeeping. You can participate in today's webinar by asking questions at any time during the presentation. Just type your question into the Ask a Question box at the bottom right of the window, and be sure to click the Submit button when you're through. We will be answering these questions during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Take a moment now to disable your pop-up blockers if they're on. Also, you can learn more about our speakers by clicking on the Speaker Bios button located below the presentation window. The slides will advance automatically throughout this event. If you like, you may also download a copy of the slides by clicking on the Download Slides button, also located below the presentation window. If at any time during this presentation you experience technical problems, you can access the webcast help guide by clicking on the Help link below the media player. In addition, you can contact the Technical Support Helpline, and you'll find that number in the help guide as well. Our speakers today are John Goodman, Vice Chairman for TARP Worldwide, and John Fassett, Vice President of SAP Business Communications Management. Welcome, John and Tony, and thank you for being part of this presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, so now on with our program. John, if you're ready, we can begin.
Okay, thank you all very much, and I'm going to be moving quite fast through some of this, but we're going to have a fair amount of time for questions at the end. Hopefully what I'm going to do in the next 30 minutes or so is make you a bit uncomfortable by challenging some of the conventional wisdom that you have. And this is both going to be focusing on enhancing your ability to resolve things on first contact, but I'm going to be focusing on somewhat different things than normally are focused on. And I'm also going to make the challenge that in many cases you're spending all your time worrying about script adherence and is Mary Lou adhering to the script, and when in fact if you took a small percentage of the resources you're using for call quality monitoring and reallocate them to why are we getting all these calls, in fact, you would be able to move out of firefighting into a preventive mode by preventing anywhere from 10 to 30% of all the contacts that you're getting. So I'm going to be talking about how one first identifies those opportunities and then how you create the economic case for the finance people and everyone else to make the investments necessary to prevent those contacts. And then at the end, we'll be giving you a very short set of criteria to grade your operation in terms of moving out of firefighting. So in terms of what's a TARP, we're also called TRAP, TWRP, and TARP. We've been around for 41 years, started in the basement of Harvard Law School, and have worked with about half the Fortune 100, and actually are given credit by Business Week for instigating the use of 800 numbers for customer service. Now, ideally, you want to do the job right the first time, and this is where companies get into trouble because they define quality as we delivered the product according to spec, which makes great sense except for customers who fail to read and do dumb things, and it's not to the point where Sharp Electronics has a red placard that says, when all else fails, try reading the directions. Now, doing it right the first time is really the customer experience, and that is where this decade is moving. Our argument is that you as the contact center director should take over the role of head of customer experience. Now to do that, you need to move away from just effective contact management, and our criticism of most contact centers is that they spend 99% of their time responding to the individual customer and less than 1% saying, what are the causes of all these calls and how do we feed back that into improved product and service quality. And so the voice of the customer really is that feedback loop, and I'm arguing you should take resources away from call quality monitoring and put them in the feedback loop, and we'll be addressing that in more detail in a few minutes. If you don't, you're going to be in a firefighting mode, and the whole objective here is to get you out of firefighting. Now, the basic premise that we're presenting in this webinar is really based on 6 foundational ideas from the book Strategic Customer Service, which we published not too long ago. It's available on Amazon for less than $20 and is a good one airplane ride read. And the 6 premises out of that book are, number 1, staff don't cause most dissatisfaction. Most organizations assume if you have a dissatisfied customer, you need to identify which frontline employee caused it and have a public hanging. We disagree with that. We think most employees come to work desperately wanting to do a good job, and if you have a dissatisfied customer, it's because sales, products, processes, or customers have caused that dissatisfaction, not the frontline employee. Also, it's cheaper to give really great service than just good service because the revenue and word-of-mouth implications of better service and quality are 10 to 20 times the investment you have to make. Thirdly, most organizations say we have a voice of the customer, it's our surveys. Well, the problem with surveys is they're a lagging indicator, and to use Federal Express as sort of a good example, FedEx knows 10 hours before you do that the package isn't going to arrive because it missed a flight in Memphis. Then they get the frantic phone call, then a couple days later they do the satisfaction survey. Now, our contention is that the operations data that says what you're going to do to that customer, the call center data, and the survey data are all describing the same set of events. So to describe the overall customer experience, you have to be able to pull all that data together. Fourth, people are still paramount, and to get a good first contact resolution, your frontline has to have flexibility to be able to handle an issue with multiple solutions depending on the circumstances, and they have to be able to give clear, believable explanations for why they are telling the customer what they're telling them. We find most people can articulate the policy, but if the customer then says, well, why do you have that policy? Why can't you do this? You get one of 2 answers, which is either, look, Mac, that's our policy, which comes across as rudeness except in New York, or the other answer is, yeah, that is a stupid policy. I work for a stupid company. So those are 2 things that we're going to come back and revisit in more detail. You also have to have technology that people will enjoy, and I'm going to be suggesting the concept of delivering psychic pizza, which is I ring your doorbell and say, here is the pizza you were about to order. To the degree that you can anticipate the customer's next need, your technology can deliver that message to the customer before they ever get around to contacting you. You avoid the call and you dazzle their socks off. And then finally, we find a lot of companies have a goal of we want to continuously exceed customer expectations. We think that's a dumb idea because in many cases investment in delight gives you no payoff, so we are strong advocates of what we call cheap delighters, and we'll talk more about that. Now, in looking at the evolution of call centers and contact centers over the last decade, in the early 2000s, the contact center was in charge of contact management, customer education, a little bit of call avoidance, handling escalated complaints to the Office of the President, and then they report data. In 2015, we think that the contact center is going to be the focal point of the voice of the customer. It will be recognized that word-of-mouth management is a critical factor in success because if you have great word-of-mouth, you need less marketing and sales expense, and word-of-mouth will be managed and measured. And the contact center will be the focal point for that. Also, the contact center will be the focal point for customer experience management, and if you play your cards right, we think you can be the chief customer officer and be viewed as a major source of innovation. You will also be coordinating or managing quality, warranty, risk, regulatory, and in many cases the website, chat, and social. And we're seeing already an evolution in this direction because a lot of companies are starting to say, wait a minute, why is IT, who is viewed as the least service-oriented department in the company, in charge of the website, which is the most important channel for communicating with our customers? And we also find that brand, in many cases, has been running social media, and more we're seeing an evolution toward the contact center taking over at least the response function with guidance from brand. In many cases, when you have a retail organization, you're also going to be making heavy input into the training of all contact staff. And in terms of who's already evolved in this direction, I have a list of 5 companies there, ConAgra, Kellogg, Pepsi-Cola, Bath and Body Works, and Wegmans, who've all pretty much moved to that role already. Now, I'd mentioned social media. And I've seen some people argue that social media is going to be the way that you service your customers in the future. And let me give you an actual example that I think argues to the contrary. I recently was having lunch with a producer from the Discovery Channel who's in charge of one of their websites, and she had the day before found something in her kid's cereal, and it was a little bit icky. So she went to the website and sent an email with a photo of it and hadn't gotten a reply by the end of the day. So she called the 800 number at the end of the day, and it was closed because it was after 7 o'clock. At that point, she then went to the company Facebook page and posted the digital picture with a label saying, "Please see the rat droppings that I found in my kid's cereal." Now, I've worked with enough cereal companies that I know that that was burned product. It wasn't rat droppings. But my main point is she tried 2 traditional channels first and only went to social media when the first 2 channels failed to respond effectively. And we are now seeing that most people do not want to complain in public, and there's a fair amount of data that suggests less than 1% of all complaints are submitted through social media. Most of it is done privately. Now, in terms of the opportunity, if you're a corporate headquarters or a manufacturer, handling the contacts you get is certainly important. And again, we're talking about first contact resolution, but I would argue that that's one of the smallest payoffs. And if you really want to go for the big wins, you want to also more aggressively solicit complaints to get the grumbles and gripes that are right now going to your channel, front line, or the retailer. And by the way, this also applies whether you're in an educational setting, a medical care setting, or a nonprofit setting. We find that most people don't complain to management or to customer service. They complain to the first employee of the organization that they run into, and if that employee really isn't equipped and says, "Yeah, that happens a lot," you've been thrown under the bus, and management's not even aware it took place. So the bigger opportunities are the opportunities to make connections with customers via your web page, and the biggest opportunity are all those people who have had a problem with or a question with your product and service and don't even ever articulate anything to you, and in many, many cases that can be 90% of the total. Now, what do customers expect in terms of contact handling? As I've already suggested, we think the biggest opportunity is to create no unpleasant surprises, proactively educate the customer so they never even have to contact you. If, in fact, they have a problem, accessibility is important, but it is not speed of answer. Our data shows I can keep you in queue for up to a minute with no discernible degradation of satisfaction if once I answer the phone, I can completely answer your question. So it's much more important what happens after the phone is answered. And are you operating all the hours when the customer is using your product? If you're not, in many cases, the customer is not going to wait until Monday morning to call with a complaint. You're just not going to hear about that, but they're going to be spreading negative word of mouth. The first person I talk to has to take ownership and give me an apology, and they have to be prepared to give me a clear, believable explanation. And if I can give you the clear, believable explanation, I can do bad things to you and still retain your loyalty. And my favorite example is if the airline pilot gets on and says we have a 1-hour delay due to a mechanical, there are a bunch of follow-ups. If he says we have a leak in the hydraulic system, everyone says, "I want a good hydraulic system, take an extra 30 minutes if necessary." We joke at Lexus that when you're saying no to the customer or giving him bad news, the object of the game is to tell the customer to go to hell in such a way that he looks forward to the trip. Now, you want to create an emotional connection rather than just having courtesy when you have the time. This may not be Monday morning when the queue is through the ceiling, but you'll see data in a few minutes that if I take 30 seconds to schmooze with you a little bit, I can get a 20-point top box lift in loyalty. Money is often not the best solution. We have found in many cases the clear, believable explanation is more important than the amount of money I offer you, and we've seen this in everywhere from automotive to health insurance. People are willing to accept one warm transfer if it then gets resolved and you explain to me that I'm transferring you to an expert. And then finally, you have to be timely and keep your promises in terms of following through. Now, what are some specific suggestions for enhancing first call resolution? Number one, misdirects and dealing with IVRs is always something that drives people nuts. Tom Peters did an interview with me a while back entitled Push 1, Push 2, Push 3, Push Your Customer Over the Edge. We have at least a bronze bullet for that issue, which is wherever you print your 800 number, print the menu they're going to encounter. It dramatically reduces frustration with the IVR and the number of misdirects that you have. Also, when you're telling people how to contact you, suggest that they can upload pictures with the complaint. Pictures worth 1,000 words, and if you tell them that up front, everyone has cell phones that can upload pictures, and it will dramatically reduce the amount of time you spend on the phone getting descriptions from the customer. You need to have routing based on customer and IVR input so that you can get the customer to a CSR who is confident, has the expertise, and is confident of the ability to resolve it. One of the ways we find for building confidence is certification of reps on certain products. So I'm a certified expert on this. I'm going to sound more confident. And what we find is, to the degree that I sound confident, the same message will be much more effective in convincing the customer. We had a mutual fund where the reps weren't all that confident, and they were getting 100,000 phone calls a month where the customer was basically saying, did you do what I asked you to do? The minute that we made them confident by improving the back end and certifying them, most of those calls went away because they said, okay, it will be done tomorrow, and they sounded confident in saying that that was going to actually happen. You need to provide tools to them. One thing is information on who this customer is, and an interesting thing Avis does with a single question on their website is they say, please tell us what kind of a customer you are. Are you a customer who wants the fanciest cars and the latest technology? Are you a business customer who just wants something with 4 wheels that will get you out of the airport? Or are you Aunt Tilly who's on vacation? The minute I know which of those segments you are, I then know what's important to you and how to skew the conversation. Again, Avis does that on their website with a single question, which then goes into the record. You need to have auto investigation. When I put in that this is a physician's office appealing this claim and I put in the claim number, the computer says, okay, to do an investigation of this claim, I need to get data from database 1, 3, and 5. And the computer automatically goes and gets that, which reduces the time and eliminates the fact that the CSR has to go look through databases looking for it. Auto investigation is something that can dramatically cut handle time and employee frustration, and in many cases improve their accuracy. You want to give them permission to create empathy with the customer, to talk about something other than the transaction. We find supervisors hate this idea of giving flexibility to the reps to decide when they're going to schmooze with the customer. But what our data shows is that if you schmooze appropriately, you in 30 to 60 seconds can get a 20-point lift in satisfaction. It's a great investment. You need flexibility in terms of saying for the more difficult issues, there are 3 or 4 ways you can handle this and use your best judgment. And again, we find supervisors are nervous doing that, but that amount of flexibility dramatically reduces escalations and callbacks shopping the system. And the way you do that training is with storytelling. I've seen organizations that actually have cardboard cutouts of different customers, and they say, okay, now if Mrs. Smith calls with this, here's how you would handle it. If Mr. Jones calls with the same issue, given his characteristics, here's how you would handle it. And storytelling works very, very well, and reps remember that. You have the clear, believable explanation that I talked about. And again, your technology can, when I put in what the reason is for contacting and what the product is, the technology in many cases can give you the talking points. So again, the system should be providing you with a lot of those tools. You want to avoid flash phrases such as, "I'm sorry for your inconvenience." The last time an airline used that on me, they had dumped me in an airport at midnight with no hotel. It was a lot more than an inconvenience. Inconvenience sounds pre-programmed, just like our policy is, or my other favorite is, "I do apologize." That sounds pre-programmed. You also, on the back end, you want auto execution to the degree that the rep says, "Okay, I'm requesting this transaction to be done," to the degree that it can go out, do the transaction, and tell the rep that it has been done. They can convey that confidence. "Yes, ma'am, it has been done. You will see it on your next statement." And again, you don't get callbacks, and you have significantly higher satisfaction. Also, another thing is, if there's a problem, if the rep doesn't just handle the problem, but assures that this input will actually impact the brand or the product or manufacturing. If you can assure institutional impact, "Ma'am, it doesn't just stop here. This is going to be reported to the manufacturing area, and they will use this to improve their quality." The customers in many cases are more interested in knowing that the product or process is being fixed than getting the coupon for free product in the future, because they don't want to go to the trouble of having to switch brands. Training, the best way of doing the training, as I've already said, is storytelling. And the storytelling can actually be tied in to motivation. One suggestion we make is what we call a victory session. And you can do this at the contact center team level, where you go around the room and each person talks about the wackiest customer or toughest situation they successfully handled in the last 2 weeks. And 4 things happen all at once. First, you get peer recognition for a job well done. Secondly, you get education. Here's the phrase I used to explain the warranty, and the guy got it, so everybody now has a new word track. Thirdly, you have a quickie policy analysis. I got this weird call, "Hey, I got one of those too," and you find out marketing did something they forgot to tell you about. And finally, you get an informal incentive, because the next time you get a truly obnoxious customer, you think, "Wow, this customer's so bad, she'd be great to talk about next Thursday, but I can only talk about her if I can successfully handle her." So it creates the incentive to go the extra mile. Now, how do you identify where you have opportunities for improving your response rules and your technology? We find most organizations measure satisfaction for the overall contact center. My recommendation is you have to measure satisfaction and impact on loyalty by type of contact. And this is taken from a high-end mail order organization where 70% of their calls were routine orders, and if it was a routine order, we knew that 98% of those people were going to be happy. On the other hand, if the item was on back order, we had only 67% satisfied. And what that told us was the way we were explaining why things were on back order was not satisfying the customer. So in this particular case, if somebody called up and ordered a Prada handbag, my suggestion, tongue partially in cheek, but we actually tried it, was, okay, a Prada handbag isn't just a handbag, it's a work of art, and Luigi in Milan isn't quite done with it yet. And the customer would laugh and say, okay, I realize they're handmade, you can't rush the artiste, I'm willing to wait. And we got a 10 or 15 point lift in satisfaction, pretty much saying, look, it's on back order, but adding some embroidery to it. So you can improve your response rules, and to the degree that you can improve your technology, you can identify where are the opportunities, what types of calls do you need to apply technology and improved response rules to enhance satisfaction. My point here is that the back order status is not Mary Lou, the frontline rep's fault. The product is on back order. You need to give her a better response rule on how to explain that in a way that the customer will find satisfactory. Now, I mentioned delight earlier. This is data that basically shows that if I take 90 seconds to have a schmooze with you on the phone, that can raise top box loyalty by as much as 25%. But it even gets better. If I cross-sell you something you actually can use, I can delight you and actually have a 30% lift, and the proactive education of here's how to avoid a problem with this product actually can give you as much as a 32% top box lift. So investing time educating customers, schmoozing with customers, and cross-selling customers is not money down a drain. In fact, it's a fabulous investment. And what you need to do is train your reps to pick the opportunities to do that. Now, in terms of the causes of customer dissatisfaction, we find, very quickly just reviewing, we find that most people assume employees are the major cause. We find customers cause 20 to 30% of all their own dissatisfaction. My favorite example is at Clorox. They get not a complaint but a helpful suggestion once a month. Why don't you make Clorox taste better? People brush their teeth with it, and it does whiten your teeth. So the basic point is that customers cause a lot of their own problems, but the company, if you have fine print or complex manuals or products, you're building dissatisfaction and unpleasant surprises into your product. And if you proactively warn the customer on how to avoid problems, you can prevent as many as 30% of those contacts from coming in. So while you certainly need to focus on first contact resolution, I would argue that as much as 30% of your workload can be prevented through better communication up front with the customer. And we'll talk more about how you do that in a minute. This is one example. This is a local car dealer that I've worked with in the Washington area, and one of the big points of pain that creates problems is labor rates. And people will say, they'll look at their invoice and say, $110 an hour, that's outrageous. So this is a sign that is behind the cashier and in the customer waiting area that says our average hourly rate is only $110. The best defense is a good offense. Here's all the stuff you get for it. And by the way, in the fine print at the bottom it says, and by the way, your plumber is $165 an hour. So what we find is that if you proactively educate the customer, you can avoid the complaint completely. Now, we recently have looked at what companies are using for voice of the customer. We found some very interesting findings. This is a survey of 160 customer experience and service strategy executives in 160 different companies. And what we found was most companies are still looking in the rearview mirror using surveys and complaint data. On the other hand, only 25% are using operational data, and a quick example there is we're working with Chicago Bank, and they had 10 complaints on I didn't get my statement. Whenever I hear somebody says they didn't get their statement, I immediately go to the mailroom and I ask the mailroom supervisor, do you ever get return mail? Oh, yeah, truckloads every day. Do you ever get return statements? Oh, yeah, last month we got 3,726 statements. And I said, well, who gets this report? Oh, no one's ever asked for it. So people with 10 complaints at the top of the building are trying to decide if they have an issue, and there's someone with operational data in the basement who knew exactly how big the issue was. Also, only about a third of people are monitoring social media, and only about 13% are using speech analytics to analyze their calls to see, really what are the implications. If you're monitoring manually a small percentage of calls, speech analytics can allow you to analyze all your calls. Now, we then asked people, what about your analysis and reporting of voice of the customer data? And we found about 1/3 of the organizations reported end-to-end where they'd taken different kinds of data, the operational, the survey, and the complaint data, and contact data, and integrated into a single picture. Those organizations were more than twice as likely to have sustained year-over-year customer satisfaction improvement than people who didn't integrate the data. Interestingly enough, we asked people how many analysts do you have working on voice of the customer, and we found there was no correlation between the number of analysts and the effectiveness of the analysis. It's what analysis you're doing, not how much analysis you're doing. And then we looked at the business case that was made by voice of the customer, and we asked people, does your CFO accept the business case made by the voice of the customer for change? And we found that about 40% of the companies where they said, yes, the CFO buys in, 40% of them had VOC processes that had significant impact on getting things fixed. Now, how did we define significant impact? We basically asked a very simple question, which was what percentage of issues raised by the voice of the customer actually get fixed in a reasonable period of time? And what we found was, and then we said, 0 to 20, 20 to 40, 40 to 60, more than 60% of the issues get fixed. And what we found was that VOC systems that had CFO buy-in, more than 40% of them said they had more than 60% of the issues raised by the VOC actually got fixed. And 55% of those companies had significant sustained year-over-year increases in customer satisfaction. Where buy-in did not exist, only 1/5 as many companies had the same kind of impact. So it is critical to have your finance people be buying in to the business case, which has 4 dimensions: improved loyalty and revenue, margin, word of mouth, and risk reduction. And I'm going to talk very briefly about each of those. Now, in terms of the departments that you should be convincing, and I'm not going to go through this in any detail right now, but we can talk about during the Q&A, marketing is very interested in retention and word of mouth. Finance wants higher margins and lower costs. Brand is interested in great stories that promote word of mouth. Quality needs contact data to make the business case. And by the way, quality can provide you in the contact center with some analytical horsepower and can work with you to actually test different opportunities. We find quality and Lean Six Sigma staffs are very good at that. Market research in many cases is uncomfortable with contact data because it's sort of viewed as dirty data. It's not statistically neat like surveys are. Channel partner marketing and management is interested in shelf space, and the more hassles the retailer has with your product, the less shelf space you get. Risk, legal, regulatory, and PR want to reduce claims and regulatory visibility, and HR wants to have happier employees because half of all voluntary turnover is due to employees saying, I'm not getting paid enough to take all this crap. There are 2 things you can do: raise the pay or lower the frustration. And product development is interested in ideas for innovation. Now, to be able to take the data and the contact data and extrapolate to the marketplace, you have to understand there's an iceberg effect. Each complaint you get, there's a bunch of others out there, and that ratio can be anywhere from 1 to 20 to 1 to 200 in most cases. Now, to the degree that you want an integrated voice of the customer, you want to be able to combine your surveys, your contact data, your operations data, and your employee input so you can quantify the cost of inaction. If you can quantify the cost of inaction, you precipitate action. And that's the key to having a voice of the customer process that really gets things fixed. Now, there are 8 factors that lead to an effective voice of the customer, and we have papers that describe this in detail. Just send me an email if you're interested in getting a description. One person has to own it. You have to have a unified data collection strategy. You have to be able to integrate the data into a unified picture, have detailed actionable reporting, quantify how much revenue is at risk for each month we don't fix the issue, say what should be done, and then start tracking, did the issue actually get fixed, and in the ideal world, tie it back to incentives. And we're going to talk very briefly about these 3 steps. As soon as it comes up. Okay, you need to understand how representative the data source is of the marketplace and how to extrapolate to the marketplace. And it's important to classify all the data in the same way. Now, picking on the airlines because this is a easy target, if you know how many people had a problem, you say how many of you complained and where did you complain? And you can basically, through those 3 questions, find out where people complained. And so in this case, we can see that 4% went to reservations. That means that for every complaint we get to reservations, we have somewhere in the range of 25 others out there. That then allows you to That then allows you to tie the, in this case, 14 calls to reservations. The multiplier is 25. That tells you you have 350 complaints out there in the marketplace. And by looking at each of the individual touch points and then taking an average, we can say, okay, we had about 550 people who had this problem, and that's doing about $300,000 worth of damage. And what you then want to be able to do is present management with this picture. How many people have had problems? How many haven't? How many are satisfied, mollified, dissatisfied? And what's the revenue and word of mouth implications of that? And what you then can do is show management that if we can reduce the problems, get more people to complain to us, or satisfy a higher percentage, we can actually reduce the number of customers at risk. And in this case, if we have 40,000 customers at risk at $200 each, that's $8 million at risk. And you can then say if we reduce problems by 20%, we're going to reduce that $8 million by $1.6 million. So this kind of a chart implies three strategies: prevention, solicitation, get more people to complain, and improved response. So you can quantify the impact of improved first contact resolution, but you can also quantify the impact of prevention. And let me just skip this because we're getting low on time. And to enhance your report impact, you should simplify to three issues. Don't bury people in data because they're not going to take the time to read it. Tailor the report to each function. And one thing Colgate said was that they hold a separate meeting with each function. Don't send one report to distribution. Tell them an action plan and even offer to pilot test it. At Wegmans, they will pilot test the plan, and once it's a success, allow the functional area to take the credit. Humanize the data with quotes, and don't say you're doing a bad job. Say, look, you're doing a great job, and see how much money you're leaving on the table. So with that, let me just raise these myths very quickly. Employees are the cause of dissatisfaction. No. Your process and products cause it. You don't want to exceed customer expectations. Answering the phone really fast is not the key to success. People, in many cases, would rather self-service themselves. The customer is not always right. Complaints are down. Things are not necessarily getting better. Price is not the key to success. People will pay for enhanced service, and my Exhibit A is Starbucks that my editor called $4. We're better than average in our industry. That's great. Not really. We're at 90% satisfaction. Let's declare victory. The law of diminishing returns does not apply. We have a 100% satisfaction guarantee, therefore everyone's happy. Absolutely not. Most people don't complain. I will provide you with this set of criteria to grade yourself on how well you're doing, which responds to all the ideas, strategic ideas in the book. And to summarize, you want to create a unified voice of the customer, understand the barriers to first call resolution, provide the necessary tools, and many of those are technology-based, quantify the revenue and word-of-mouth impact, and then you can take control of the voice of the customer and become the chief customer officer and start delivering psychic pizza. I've run a few minutes over, but hopefully I've stimulated your thinking. Everything I've talked about is available in Strategic Customer Service, which is on Amazon. Thanks very much, and let me turn it back over to Christine.
Thank you so much, John. So I just want to take a quick second to remind everybody that you can continue to ask questions through the Q&A box, and that if you would like to download these slides, they are available. So now, Tony, if you're ready, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Tony Fassett. I'm the Vice President of SAP Business Communications Management. And today, I'd like to talk to you about how SAP can help you achieve first contact resolution. So SAP Business Communications Management is an all-software-based, multi-channel contact center suite. It includes inbound contact center, outbound contact center, expert and mobile users, as well as automated interactive voice response. It has an additional benefit in that it has deep process integration, business process integration, natively integrated to SAP CRM product suite, as well as SAP ERP. It can also be integrated with other third-party applications such as productivity tools to deliver further process integration. As you look at the broad slide description of what business communications management is, it is an all-in-one offering, which is has a wide breadth of functionality, including unified voicemail, quality monitoring, real-time supervising, and one of the important aspects that's also in the product is its very good analytics and reporting, which I think is very important when you reflect upon some of the discussion that John had when it comes to detection and prevention of calls coming into the contact center. So these are all important aspects to think about when thinking about achieving first contact resolution. So I'd like to share with you some best practices as well as some solution enablers that will help you effectively implement those best practices. So from a business communications management perspective, we'll kind of look at 4 of these best practices. And the first one that I'll talk about is time to answer. Now, I know John shared with you that you don't have to answer the phone call quickly or the interaction quickly, whether it be chat, email, or phone call. I would also contend that you don't want to overextend that privilege and make them wait an eternity. So you will have defined service levels undoubtedly for your various channels, whether that's phone, email, chat, etc. And one of the ways that business communications management can effectively help you meet that particular best practice or KPI is to reduce the time to answer. And what we are able to do is help virtualize your contact center. So virtualizing the contact center enables you to reach to an ecosystem that extends beyond the glass walls where your agents are located. And it allows you to effectively bring resources with proper skills, no matter where they're located, and insert them into an interaction immediately. And when I can expand my resource pool, I can effectively start bettering my time to answer. So improving my service levels and getting to the customer in an excellent time response. Next, now that I have this interaction ongoing, the next thing I need to do is I need to quickly move to time to context. And time to context is, why is the customer calling? What are they calling me about? What have they called me about before? So I want to develop this picture of this interaction as soon as possible. And the way the solution enables you to do that is that it's natively integrated with its IVR all the way through to the SAP CRM product portfolio. And by integrating all of these elements together, what we're able to do is grab data very quickly, do some data dips, so we can take information that was perhaps entered into the IVR, right? We don't want it to be cumbersome and keep them there for a long time, but we would like to find out as quickly as possible maybe why they're calling, or a product that they're calling on, or maybe even just auto-gather some information such as the phone number they're calling from, do a data dip into our CRM, and provide a nice picture immediately to the resource that's going to be servicing them. And remember, I said resource and not agent, because you may choose to bypass the agent immediately based upon the context and based upon who's calling. It put them immediately in contact with a resource that's maybe a field service engineer, or it could be one of your vendors or partners, somebody in your ecosystem that can service them immediately. Next, we'll move on to another KPI, which is going to be time to skills. So I've answered the phone. I know who's calling and why they're calling. So I have enough information to really say, hey, who in my ecosystem is the best skilled resource to help this customer? And this is very important when we're trying to strive for this first contact resolution. So what we do is We take the skill sets, we put those into the system, and then we pass through the hints from the IVR and the data dip into CRM, and we marry that all together, and we quickly come up with a path to the best skilled resource. And because we virtualize the contact center, that resource is not necessarily sitting in the contact center. And because we are a multi-channel solution, that can be on the medium that's being sought after by the customer. It could be a text, it could be a chat, or it could be an email. So now we've entered the interaction quickly. We know who is interacting with us and why. And now we have the best skilled resource in that interaction ready to dialogue very quickly in a productive conversation. So next what we move to is finally the time to resolution. So if I have the best skilled resource talking to my customer or emailing with my customer, how do I ensure that we augment their skill set to bring to closure the very first time through for our customer? And the way that we do this is with our CRM integration. So our native CRM integration allows for information at the fingertips of that resource, being an agent or a field service representative. So things like knowledge bases, et cetera, are available at the fingertips. And what I do is I have enabled that resource, and I've done this in a way that is very productive for them because it's in a unified desktop, meaning there are no disparate applications that they have to jump to. It's a single productivity tool, and all of this information is there. So I've quickly been able to enter the interaction. I've been able to identify who's calling, why. I've been able to quickly put the right skilled resource into that interaction, and I've given them the tools that they need to be able to drive that interaction to success. And that's the value of an all-in-one solution that's deeply integrated with your productivity tools like SAP CRM. So historically, if we look at a solution like this, from a technology perspective, it's typically required deep levels of integration with disparate systems. And all of that has changed now. Because of this all-in-one solution offering integrated with our SAP CRM product portfolio, we're able to deliver this that actually offers the lower total cost of ownership to our customers. So some of the aspects in that are pre-built integration with our enterprise application. So we're reducing the complexity, the installation, and the maintenance. By offering a single all-in-one solution, reducing the installation, support, and maintenance costs. And ultimately, too, we're based on open hardware and software standards. So you can leverage your existing relationships with your hardware and software vendors to get the most out of your systems. You can also leverage your existing infrastructure to plug BCM, or Business Communications Management, into your service arena and to quickly bring it to fruition to have this full circle service opportunity to drive first contact resolution. So I think we heard some great information from John today. I think he's really challenged us to think outside of the box, to move towards more of a proactive feel and touch. And then I've also been delighted to share with you our product solution and how we can help you affect first contact resolution. So with that, Christina, I'd like to turn it back to you for the question and answer section.
Thank you so much, Tony. All right, so now we've gotten to the Q&A portion of our program. So many great questions coming in. So let's start with this one, which I think is directed towards, looks like it's directed towards John. So in some heavily regulated industries, it is hard to make the frontline agents flexible since legal compliance requires scripts and little flexibility. So John, how do we create a flexible agent in this environment?
Okay, that is a standard objection we get, and in fact, where the term flexibility originally came from was a conversation I had with the head of customer experience at American Express, who said, I wish we could just get the front line to be willing to break the rules for good customers. And I said, given Sarbanes-Oxley and compliance, that ain't going to happen because you break the rules, you go to jail. However, if you redefine the rules at the issue level, saying, for this particular issue, there are four ways you can handle it, and here are 4 alternative scripts or modifications, and again, you don't necessarily have to have, I'm against word-for-word scripts, but talking points, and you have 4 different guidelines. Use your best judgment. You have met the compliance and Sarbanes-Oxley's requirements, but you also have the flexibility. We have found in government agencies and in highly regulated environments, banking, insurance, medical care, adverse events, that if you can give people rational guidance, that is just as good and in many ways is better than having a specific script, because, for instance, in the auto industry, if you have a specific script of if this happens, give them this, that's called a hidden warranty. So we think talking points and multiple scenarios are the way to go.
Great, thank you. And Tony, did you have anything that you might want to add on to that, or?
I think that was great.
Okay, perfect. So now the next question we have is for you, Tony. So what technology enablers are changing the game in FCR?
Yeah, the technology enablers, really it's IP or Internet Protocol telephony. I think that what you're seeing is that by the nature of this transformation or shift from these kind of proprietary hardware-intensive systems to these open software-based communication platforms, we've really been able to do some changes in the game via integration and delivery mechanisms. So a couple of the examples of these would be is that when I take, let's say I take IP telephony and I integrate it with CRM. Today, those speak the same language. They're speaking IP. Well, that's great. But because I'm enabling that level of integration and to make it seamless, I'm able to drive the further activities, such as these screen pops that include all of the customer's information, having all of that at hand. And really, ultimately, what this does, too, is this drives one of the biggest things, which is this virtualization of the contact center. So by being software-based, by allowing resources anywhere in the world to pick up a phone, their computer, and effectively become part of the customer service experience, that really has been the technology enabler to drive such a big change.
And I would just add to that, this whole issue of ubiquitous technology and ubiquitous handling is critically important because especially in global companies now, regulatory environments in one continent are saying, what have you seen in another continent? And you need to have comparable data captured across all the global markets. And all that has to be easily assembled, so you need to have ubiquitous systems across the world.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question that we can address today. So this one goes to John. John, you talked about integrating many kinds of data. Is it critical to include all the kinds that you mentioned? It seems like a lot of work.
We're strong advocates of better a small success than a big disaster. And so our suggestion is you start with operational data, which is always the messiest to get hold of, and pick operational data that describes 2 or 3 problems, or ideally even 1 or 2 problems that have been dragging on for a long time that everybody agrees is something that's screwing the consumer or the customer but hasn't gotten fixed. And just gather data on that one issue, tie it to your complaint data and contact data and your survey data. get a victory from that, and that then creates the precedent for, hey, having this integrated picture really does get something fixed. Then you move on to the next item, and you slowly build credibility rather than saying we need a system that pulls all this stuff together right away, because that's the formula for disaster. So better a small success than a big disaster. Pick one kind of data that describes one issue, integrate that, and then slowly move on. This is a 2 or 3 year process in many organizations.
Great. Thank you so much, John. Well, unfortunately, that is all the questions that we have time for today. If we didn't get to yours, don't worry. We will be reaching out to answer all of your questions that are in the queue following this presentation. So if you would like to stay in touch with John and Tony with any additional questions you may have, please feel free to reach out to them. And please be sure to visit ICMI.com to find out about related training or upcoming webinars. And we hope that you will join us again soon. Shortly after today's live event, you can access this presentation on demand. This webcast is copyright 2012 by ICMI. The presentation materials are owned by or copyright, if that is the case, by ICMI, which is solely responsible for its content, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of our guests and our sponsor, SAP, we thank you for joining us today.